Hello, welcome back. If you're new here, I'm glad you found your way in. And if you've been here before, well, you already know the vibe. Get yourself comfortable. Lights off or dim, whatever works. And if you're the type who falls asleep within 20 minutes, don't worry about missing anything. That's sort of the whole point. Tonight we're talking about House of the Dragon. Season 3. Now I want to be upfront about something. At the time I'm putting this together, Season 3 has only just started airing. We've had one episode, which was, by most accounts, absolutely extraordinary. And there are 7 more still to come. So what this video is, at its heart, is a theory video. A lore dive. A relaxed tour through what's coming, what the books suggest, how the show has already started diverging from them, and what all of it might mean for the characters we've been following for 3 years now. If you've read Fire and Blood, George R.R. Martin's novel that House of the Dragon is adapted from, some of what we're discussing tonight you'll already know. But knowing what happens in the book and watching the show do it, or watching the show change it entirely, are 2 very different experiences. The show has already changed enough that even well-read fans genuinely don't know what's coming, which is kind of wonderful actually. And if you haven't read the book, that's completely fine. We'll cover everything you need as we go. No knowledge test at the door, so we'll start with a gentle refresher on where Season 2 left things, since it's been a couple of years, and names like Dukai Recess and A.Y. Mond and Deeren all tend to blur into a single, silver-haired posh boy after a while. Then we'll walk through what happened in the Season 3 premiere. From there we'll move into the major theories, what's coming for Rhaenyra, once she actually sits on the Iron Throne, what A.Y. Mond does when nobody's watching him, where the Dragon Seed's loyalties are really headed, what the books say about Rhaenyra's fate, and whether that legendary fight over the God's Eye Lake happens this season, or whether we're waiting another year for it. There's a lot to get through, and we'll take our time. If you're new to the channel, and you like this kind of thing, lore, theories, relaxed deep dives into fantasy shows, and their source material, then a subscribe is genuinely appreciated, but no pressure. You can always come back later, or not. Either way, you're here now, and that's enough. Right then, let's begin. 2 years is a long time to hold a narrative in your head, especially one involving about 30 characters, whose names sound like variants on the same 4 syllables. So before we get into theories and battles and betrayals, let's just take a quiet moment to remember where we actually are. The Dance of the Dragons, that's what the Targaryen Civil War is called, in case the name slipped, kicked off at the end of Season 1 when King Viserys died. His wife Alicent, operating on what turned out to be a catastrophic misunderstanding of his final muttered words, had her son A.Y. gone crowned king before Rhaenyra even knew her father was gone. That misunderstanding, by the way, is one of the show's best dramatic inventions. In the book, the Hightower faction knew perfectly well that Viserys wanted Rhaenyra as his heir and chose to ignore it. In the show, Alicent genuinely thought she was doing the right thing, which makes her position across Season 2 and into Season 3 so much more interesting to watch. Because by the end of Season 2, Alicent has completely unravelled from that position. She's watched her eldest son, A.Y. get badly burned at Rook's Rest by his own brother, A.Y. Mond. She's watched her father Otto get dismissed from his post as Hand and then disappear entirely. We saw him briefly at the end of Season 2, locked up in a cell somewhere, though nobody's confirmed who put him there. She's watched A.Y. Mond declare himself Prince Regent and start making increasingly alarming decisions. And she's watched her daughter, Rhaenyra, the quiet, prophetic one, slowly retreat into herself after the murder of her young son, Jaehaerys. So in the Season 2 finale, Alicent does something quite extraordinary. She secretly sails to Dragonstone and meets with Rhaenyra. She offers her a deal. She'll make sure King's Landing is left essentially undefended when Rhaenyra comes to take it, the gates will open, the guards will stand down. All she asks in return is her freedom and the lives of her remaining children. The problem, of course, is that Alicent doesn't fully have control over events. Awagon had already been smuggled out of King's Landing by Larys Strong, who is the show's master operator of back-channel schemes, before this deal was even struck. So when Rhaenyra eventually arrives, the king she was promised won't be there. Meanwhile, across Season 2, Rhaenyra has been trying to even up her advantage in dragons. The problem with a civil war, where both sides have fire-breathing animals, is that you need more fire-breathing animals than the other side. Rhaenyra's lot, Team Black, as fans tend to call them, had more dragons in number, but several were unmanned, riderless, just sitting on Dragonstone being feral. So the show introduced the concept of dragon seeds, people with distant Targaryen blood who might be able to claim these dragons. The plan worked, more or less. 3 unlikely small folk ended up bonding with the big unclaimed ones. Hugh Hammer, a blacksmith, claimed Vermithor. Ulf White, a professional drunk who somehow charmed Silverwing. And Adam of Hull, who is quietly, fairly certainly, Corlys Vulair On's illegitimate son, and who claimed Sea Smoke. At the same time, Daemon, Rhaenyra's husband and general chaos agent, spent most of Season 2 at Harrenhal having visions. These weren't just atmospheric dragon show spookiness. The show used them to explicitly show Daemon glimpsing future events, White Walkers, a young woman hatching dragon eggs, Du Naya is Targaryen. This is the show reaching forward across 200 years of Westerosi history and saying, in no uncertain terms, that what happens here has consequences that echo all the way to Game of Thrones. Daemon saw all of that, and it changed something in him. He came back to Rhaenyra and bent the knee, and then the Battle of Rook's Rest happened, which was Season 2's standout moment. Rhaenyra's great aunt, the queen who never was, and arguably the most capable person on either side of the war, flew her dragon Meleys into what turned out to be a trap. Mond ambushed them with Vhagar, which is the largest, oldest dragon alive, and Awagon turned up uninvited on Sunfire. Meleys and Rhaenys died. Aegon and Sunfire were badly burned, and Aemon declared himself Prince Regent over a king nobody was quite sure was even still alive. That's where we left things. On one side, Rhaenyra, now with 3 new dragon seeds, a husband who's finally fully committed, and a deal with Alicent that gives her King's Landing almost for free. On the other side, Mond sitting on a throne that isn't quite his, a badly injured elder brother who's been spirited away, an army marching toward King's Landing from the south under Ormond Hightower, and a mother who's quietly trying to undermine him. One thing I didn't mention that I should, because it feeds directly into the emotional texture of where things stand. The blood and cheese incident. That was the very first thing Season 2 showed us. Daemon hiring 2 men to murder Mond in his bed, as revenge for the death of Rhaenyra's son, Lucerys, at the end of Season 1. The men couldn't get to Mond. They were in the wrong part of the Red Keep, and so, on the instruction they'd been given to take a son for a son, they murdered Alicent's grandson, Jaehaerys, instead. Awagon and Rhaenyr's little boy, barely old enough to know his name. The show handles this scene with quite extraordinary restraint. The horror of it is conveyed almost entirely through Rhaenyr's face and the aftermath, and it sets up the moral logic that runs through the entire second season. The war is being conducted through children. Lucerys was a child. Jaehaerys was a child. The people making the decisions that kill them are adults playing politics across the bodies of the next generation. Daemon arranged the blood and cheese incident and never fully reckoned with it. Rhaenyra didn't sanction it, but she didn't grieve for Jaehaerys in the ways she might have done if she hadn't been in her own grief over Luke. The show is very clear about what kind of conflict this is. Not a clean war of ideals, but a cascading series of retaliations, each one worse than the last, justified by what came before it, generating the next justification in turn. By the time Season 3 opens, we've had years of this, and the people who started it are now faced with a war that has grown far beyond anyone's ability to simply call off. Rhaenyra has been carrying the weight of Jaehaerys' death for the entire duration of Season 2, largely alone. Aegon is not a good companion in grief. Alicent is managing the political situation. Mond doesn't do grief, he does rage. Rhaenyra sits in empty rooms and talks to spiders and waits for the things she already knows are coming. If Season 3 is going to give her an ending, it's going to have to reckon with the specific, accumulated weight of everything she's watched happen since that first episode of Season 2. The show's third season wastes absolutely no time. So, Episode 1 of Season 3, the title is Salt and Sea, Fire and Blood, and that is doing a lot of heavy lifting on behalf of what unfolds over the course of the hour. Because what we got right there in the very first episode, no warm-up, no extended political scene setting, was the Battle of the Gullet, one of the biggest naval battles in the history of Westeros. And it ended with a death that, if you hadn't read the book, probably felt like the floor collapsing under you. Let me walk through it. The Gullet is the narrow channel between Dragonstone and the coast of the Crownlands. It's the body of water that Corlys Fulair Eon's fleet has been using to maintain a naval blockade on King's Landing all this time, cutting off supply ships and slowly strangling the capital. The Green's answer to this, brokered by Thailand Lan Ista on Mond's behalf, was to bring in the Triarchy, a coalition of associate city-states with a sizable fleet of their own, led by a naval commander named Sharako Lohar. The plan was to break the blockade from the outside, while the situation in King's Landing was, shall we say, still sorting itself out. What the Triarchy didn't fully account for was dragons. What Rhaenyra's side didn't fully account for was how chaotic things were about to become. The battle opens with the Fulair on fleet engaged, Corlys commanding from his flagship, and Jace, Dukaya is Fulair Eon, Rhaenyra's eldest son and heir to the throne, is out there on his dragon Vermax, doing what he was always going to do, which is put himself directly in harm's way on behalf of his mother's cause. Back on Dragonstone, Rhaenyra has been told the plan. Alicent has promised that King's Landing will be left open, so Rhaenyra is supposed to stay on the island and coordinate the march on the city. Jace doesn't want her in the battle. He locks her in her room, which, as a last decision before dying, is both very sweet and also quite presumptuous, really. The last exchange between Rhaenyra and Jace is quiet and devastating. She starts to say, "If you die," and he stops her with, "Then you shall at last be king." And then he's gone. Baela, Jace's betrothed, Daemon's daughter, is also in the fight on her dragon Moondancer. And then there's Rhaenyra, Baela's sister, who has spent the previous season chasing the wild dragon sheep stealer across half the Vale, trying to form a bond with him. She finally does, and she flies him into the battle. This is where the episode's tragedy really takes shape, because Sheep Stealer is a feral dragon who doesn't care about sides. He attacks indiscriminately, including Baela and Jace. Rhaenyra can't control him. Vermax gets shot down over the water. Multiple scorpion bolts from the Triarchy's ships, the heavy anti-dragon crossbows they'd spent years developing. Vermax goes into the sea. Jace goes with him, surfaces, grabs onto wreckage, and then the Triarchy soldiers find him in the water and put 3 arrows in him. He's gone. The battle is technically won by the Blacks. The blockade holds. Corlys's fleet survives. Sharako Lohar is killed by Alyn of Hull in a wonderfully staged confrontation in the water. But Jace is dead, Vermax is dead, and Rhaenyra is going to find out about her son while standing on the island she's been locked into. There's a detail about Jace's arc across the first 2 seasons that I think deserves naming, because it makes his death in episode 1 land differently than a straightforward plot casualty. Jace has been in a lot of ways the functional adult in Rhaenyra's household. He's the one who went to the wall in season 2 episode 1 and was diplomatic enough to win Cregan Stark's cautious support. He's the one who managed the Black Council's more fractious personalities with more tact than most of the adults around him. He was being groomed as heir not just in name but in practice, and he was doing it well. His death removes not just a person Rhaenyra loves, but the person who is most realistically going to grow into the next capable ruler in her line. The heir isn't just gone, the future he represented is gone with him. Now the book version of this is quite different, and it's worth touching on, because the changes the show made are going to matter for everything that follows. In Fire and Blood, Nettles, a young girl of common birth, a dragon seed, is the one who rides Sheepstealer at the gullet. Rhaenyra stays in the Vale in the books, eventually bonding with a much younger dragon called Morning. The show merged these 2 characters into one, keeping Rhaenyra and giving her Sheepstealer, and cutting Nettles out of the story entirely, which sounds like a simplification but is actually quite consequential, because the Nettles storyline in the book, her relationship with Daemon, and what Rhaenyra does when she hears about it, is one of the darkest beats in the whole dance. With Rhaenyra holding that role instead, the emotional and political fallout is going to be completely different. The other change worth noting is that in the book, Rhaenyra used 2 young sons by Daemon, Aegon the Younger, and Little Visire ISS, are actually involved in the battle somehow, in the chaos of the ships. That doesn't happen in the show, possibly because the child actors are too young for that storyline. Those boys are presumably still somewhere in the Vale, or being sheltered elsewhere, but their absence from the gullet means their role in the season ahead is still genuinely unknown. And then there's the A.Y. Mond scene. Before the battle, we see Alicent trying to convince her son to fly to Harrenhal on Vhagar, leaving King's Landing exposed. She employs flattery, reason, appeals to his pride and his fear. And just before he leaves, he kisses her. On the mouth, not a peck, a proper kiss, full of something deeply uncomfortable to watch. Both actors have described it as revolting to film. Olivia Cook said it was quite odd for both of us, and Ewan Mitchell said it made him want to be physically ill. And yet there it is. It tells you exactly where A.Y. Mond is psychologically. He's been the overlooked second son his entire life, and now he's effectively king, and his mother is the only person who has ever consistently made him feel seen. His feelings for her have curdled into something genuinely disturbing. The show is doing something with A.Y. Mond that the book can't quite do. Fire and Blood is written as history, told by scholars, and it doesn't have access to A.Y. Mond's inner life the way the show does. What we're watching is the portrait of a man who has let rage and isolation do terrible things to whatever warmth he once had. So Alicent's deal is done. A.Y. Mond is heading for Harrenhal. The Hightower army has been ordered through a note forged in A.Y. Mond's name, because Alicent is quietly brilliant at operational deception when she needs to be, to stop marching north and hold their position. King's Landing is about to have almost nobody defending it, and Rhaenyra has just been handed the worst possible emotional context for making political decisions. She's just lost Jace. The theory, almost universally agreed upon at this point, is that Episode 2 brings us the fall of King's Landing. Rhaenyra flying in on Syrax, probably with Daemon on Kurak Seas at her side, probably with several of the Vuelair on ships as backup. The Gold Cloaks, who were always more or less loyal to whoever was sitting most firmly on the throne, switching allegiance once the dragons show up. The city gates opening without much of a fight, because Alicent has seen to it that there's nobody left to put up one. In Fire and Blood, the actual fall of King's Landing is described as almost anticlimactic. After all the build-up, all the dragon battles and political manoeuvring, the city just opens. The people cheer, some of them. Rhaenyra is crowned queen. It's the moment she and her supporters have been fighting for since the beginning. The show's version of this, though, is going to land quite differently, because in the book, Rhaenyra arrives as the victorious queen. In the show, she's arriving as a grieving mother, who's just lost her eldest son hours before. Jace is dead. The heir she was grooming, the boy she told the Song of Ice and Fire prophecy to, the one who locked her in her room so she wouldn't die in the battle, gone. Taking King's Landing in those circumstances is not going to feel like triumph. It's going to feel like completion of a task she has to do regardless of what just happened to her. And Daemon. There's a line from the Weeks Ahead trailer where he asks her, "Will you let him die in vain?" Which suggests that in the immediate aftermath of Jace's death, Daemon is the one pushing Rhaenyra forward, using her grief as momentum, which is completely on brand for Daemon and also speaks to exactly why their relationship is so complicated. He's not wrong exactly, but there's something about a man leveraging his wife's grief to make a military point that doesn't sit entirely comfortably. Rhaenyra's response to that line is one for the ages. "I will never have justice, but what crumbs of it may be snatched, I will devour." That's not the cautious, politically minded woman we watched through seasons 1 and 2, trying to find peaceful paths. That's someone who has moved past the hope of clean outcomes and is just going to take what she can. There is a visual theory floating around that I find compelling purely on aesthetic grounds. That Rhaenyra's arrival in King's Landing will be deliberately shot to mirror Aegon II's coronation in the season 1 finale. The same city, the same crowds, the same architectural spaces, but with the colour palette shifted from green to black, and the emotional register from triumphant to something more complicated. The show has always been thoughtful about visual callbacks, and this would be a meaningful one. The city that watched one Targaryen crowned through fire and pageantry, now watching another take it back in grief and determination. 2 seasons of war between those 2 moments. That's the kind of filmmaking choice this show makes when it's operating at its best. Now, the deal Alicent struck had conditions. She wants her life and her children's lives spared. She told Rhaenyra that Awagon would be there. But Awagon is gone. Larys smuggled him out before any of this was arranged. So when Rhaenyra walks in expecting to find the king she has to deal with, he's not there. That absence is going to create a problem, because Rhaenyra's political legitimacy depends in part on there being an acknowledged resolution to the Green Claim. If Awagon just escapes and is never formally dealt with, he remains a symbolic rallying point for anyone who wants to challenge her rule later. The show set this up very deliberately. Alicent made a deal she couldn't fully keep, even if she intended to, because she didn't know AY Gone was already gone when she made it. And somewhere in an unknown cell, Otto Hightower is sitting and waiting. His absence from events this season has been conspicuous. We saw him briefly at the end of season 2, just awake in a dark room, clearly held prisoner. By whom? Nobody's confirmed it. The most popular theory is that it's either Larys, who would absolutely lock up a rival schemer for safekeeping, or it's agents loyal to someone who wants Otto's intelligence on the green cause without his active involvement. He'll come back. He's too useful a character to just be in a cell forever. But his timing matters enormously. What does it mean if Rhaenyra finds him? What does it mean for Alicent if her father appears in the aftermath of King's Landing's fall? There's another theory about the city's small folk that I think is worth sitting with. Because even if the gates open and the gold cloak switch sides and there's no real battle, King's Landing has been under a naval blockade for months. The people are hungry. They're exhausted. They've been living in a city at war run by a regent who's been randomly burning things, and an absent king who was carried out of the Red Keep on a stretcher. When Rhaenyra flies in on her dragon, however magnificently, she is not arriving to a city that simply loves her. She's arriving to a city that has been suffering. And how she handles that in the first days of her reign, whether she shows mercy, whether she's seen to be generous, whether the small folk's relationship with her new government starts on a foundation of goodwill or fear, is going to matter enormously for what comes next. The show has spent a long time building Rhaenyra as someone with genuine care for ordinary people. Whether that survives contact with actually ruling in the midst of grief, with enemies still at large, with dragons losing and alliances fraying, that's what season 3 seems to be fundamentally about. So she sits the throne. Finally, after 2 full seasons of being told she's the rightful heir, after watching her sons die and her alliances crack and her husband go half mad in a haunted castle, Rhaenyra Targaryen is queen. She's in the Red Keep. She's got the Iron Throne beneath her. She's won. And almost immediately, if fire and blood is any guide, things start going wrong. The book's portrait of Rhaenyra's reign in King's Landing is one of the stranger passages in Martin's fictional history. She arrives triumphant and deteriorates fairly quickly into paranoia, grief-driven erratic decisions, and a relationship with the small folk that sours faster than anyone expected. The scholar who wrote the account we're reading describes her as becoming increasingly isolated, making enemies of potential allies, and handling the fragile balance of power in a newly taken city with far less patience than the situation required. The show has spent 3 seasons building a more nuanced version of Rhaenyra than the book's rather uncharitable portrait. The book is told by unreliable narrators with their own biases, which is part of what makes it interesting as a source text. So the show's version of paranoid, isolated Rhaenyra is probably going to be handled with more empathy. But the structural beats of her reign, the bad decisions, the creeping distrust of even her closest allies, those are almost certainly coming. One of the things the book is quite explicit about is that Rhaenyra becomes deeply suspicious of her new dragon seeds. These are men and women she's given dragons to, who have fought on her behalf, who have literally helped take King's Landing. And fairly quickly she starts wondering whether she can actually trust them. There's a particular accusation levelled at Adam of Hull, who is one of the more obviously decent characters in the whole story, that results in something deeply unjust. I won't get fully into that yet because it's better saved for the Dragon Seed section, but the short version is grief and paranoia are a terrible combination in someone who has actual political power. Then there's Misar-E. She's been Rhaenyra's spy master, and depending on how you read certain scenes in Season 2, something more than that. In the book, a woman named Misar-E, known as the White Worm, plays a complicated double role in Rhaenyra's court, simultaneously advising her and maintaining connections the Queen probably wouldn't approve of. The show's version of this relationship is more emotionally grounded, and Misar-E seems genuinely loyal, but the structural role she plays, the person who whispers in the Queen's ear, has historically gone badly in this story. And there's the question of Aegon's absence. In the book, when Rhaenyra takes King's Landing, she makes rather a point of publicly humiliating what remains of the Green cause, parading Meleys's severed head that Criston Cole had displayed, turning the symbols of Green propaganda into trophies for the Blacks. It's politically understandable and personally satisfying for her, but it also antagonises people who might otherwise have been brought around. In the show's version, the optics are different because Aegon isn't there. There's no king to deal with, no formal surrender, no clean ending to the Green claim. What there is, Aemond, who is still out there with Vhagar and is absolutely not going to sit quietly now that Rhaenyra is on the throne. Alicent, who is now essentially a prisoner in the court of the woman she helped start a war against. Laenor, who has been suffering quietly and continues to do so. And an enormous standing army of Hightowers somewhere to the south that has received orders to halt, but that can very easily reverse course. What the show seems to be building toward is Rhaenyra's reign as a queen, who is perpetually responding to fires she can't quite extinguish, and who increasingly lets the fear of losing what she has shape her into someone harder, colder, and more ruthless than she started. There's a reason people in the books compare her to Maegor the Cruel at her worst moments. Maegor was a Targaryen king so terrible that his moniker literally rhymes with cruelty. Being compared to him by your own people is not a sign things are going well. The show won't go as far as the book in some of this, I suspect, but the arc is there. The woman who wanted to rule with mercy is going to keep finding that mercy has consequences in wartime, and she's going to have to decide again and again whether to pay those consequences or take the easier, harder option. One small detail I find genuinely fascinating, talking about her time on the throne. In Fire and Blood, the Iron Throne itself is described as a genuinely uncomfortable seat. It's made of swords and occasionally cuts whoever sits in it. Martin has said that's intentional, that the throne was built as a reminder that ruling is not comfortable, and Rhaenyra is described as the Iron Throne, cutting her hands during her reign. It's a bit on the nose as symbolism goes, but in a story this interested in the physical cost of political power, it tracks completely. There's also the question of what happens to the physical city of King's Landing under Rhaenyra's new administration, which is something the book addresses briefly, but the show has space to be more concrete about. The naval blockade was effective militarily. It's part of why Alicent eventually had to make her deal, but it had devastating secondary effects on the people living in the city. Food was scarce, prices were high, the small folk were already exhausted and hungry before Rhaenyra arrived. She needs to undo that damage quickly to win their basic goodwill, and doing that costs money and organisational capacity that a new government in the middle of a war doesn't easily have. This is where Misar-E matters, tactically. She grew up in King's Landing's underworld. She knows the city's rhythms, its black markets, its community structures, the people who actually run things at street level rather than throne level. If Rhaenyra uses her properly, and properly means trusting her enough to act with real authority, Misar-E can be the connective tissue between the new queen and the people who are going to decide, day by day, whether this reign feels legitimate or not. But trust is something Rhaenyra has been burning through at a fairly alarming rate. Season 2 showed her making decisions in moments of grief that she later had to walk back. The blood and cheese incident was carried out by a man she trusted, Daemon, without her knowledge or consent, and the political damage of it fell on her anyway. She's been learning, over 2 seasons, that having the right intentions doesn't protect you from the consequences of other people's actions. That lesson is about to get considerably harder. The theory that Rhaenyra becomes increasingly isolated in King's Landing, relying on fewer advisors, trusting fewer people, making decisions from a place of fear rather than confidence, is well supported by both the book and by the emotional arc the show has been building. She started out as someone who genuinely believed she could rule differently. By the time the storming of the dragon pit happens, she has apparently become something else. The question the show's going to have to answer is, how does it honour the version of Rhaenyra it spent 3 seasons building, while also telling that arc honestly? While all of this is happening in King's Landing, Awash is somewhere out in the Riverlands, on the back of the largest living dragon in the world, and he is going absolutely feral. Let's talk about what the books say Awash gets up to once he's out from under any form of institutional constraint, because it's quite something. In Fire and Blood, after the fall of King's Landing, Awash, having effectively lost the city, having lost his brother, Awash gone to flight, having watched his mother make a deal behind his back that she could never admit to, essentially becomes a one-man campaign of destruction. He flies Vargar across the Riverlands and burns things. Towns, castles, holdfasts, mills. He burns them. Not for strategic reasons necessarily. He burns them because it's what he can do, and he has lost everything else. The Riverlands are described as scorched earth by the time he's done, a trail of ash and ruin cutting across the middle of Westeros. From a military standpoint, it achieves almost nothing. It terrorizes people who weren't combatants. It turns potential neutral parties firmly against the Greens. It makes Awash a figure of horror, even to people who might have had some sympathy for the Green cause. But that's sort of the point, I think, from a character perspective. Awash doesn't have a plan. He has a dragon and a tremendous amount of rage, and those 2 things in combination are frankly catastrophic for everyone in a several-mile radius. The show is going to do something interesting with this because they've spent considerable time making Awash a character we understand, even when we can't quite root for him. Ewan Mitchell plays him as someone who has been performatively cold for so long that the performance has almost become real, almost, but not quite. There's something underneath. The episode One Kiss shows you what it is, in the most uncomfortable possible way. And then there's Harrenhal. Awash arrives at Harrenhal, which is the enormous half-ruined castle that Daemon has been using as a base. Simon Strong, the charming, gracious, slightly delightful old Castellan, who has been doing his best under impossible circumstances since Season 2, is there. In the book, Awash arrives and kills most of the people there, including the Strongs. He puts them to the sword for their allegiance to the Blacks. Simon Strong almost certainly dies when Awash takes Harrenhal. I say almost certainly because the show has been known to let characters survive longer than expected, and Simon Russell Beale is playing him, and he's wonderful, so there's always hope. But it doesn't look great. At Harrenhal, Awash also meets Alice Rivers. Now Alice has already been established in Season 2 as a mysterious prophetic figure. At Harrenhal, she was the one feeding Daemon visions, the one who seemed to know things she shouldn't, the one who seemed to occupy some strange space between witch and seer. In the books, she and AY Mond become lovers, which is a choice, given that AY Mond has just kissed his mother and is now apparently going to take a mystical castle witch as a companion. The show is absolutely committed to making him as psychologically complex and unsettling as possible. In Fire and Blood, Alice Rivers eventually claims to be pregnant with AY Mond's child, and there are various accounts of what happened to this supposed child, none of them reliable. The book's whole unreliable narrator structure means that Alice is a figure of genuine ambiguity. Is she a greenseer, a manipulator, someone who genuinely loved AY Mond in her way? Nobody agrees. The show's version of Alice has already been positioned closer to the mystical end of that spectrum, so I'd expect her scenes with AY Mond to be quite surreal. What interests me about the AY Mond-Alice pairing in the show's context is what Alice represents for him. She's not family. She's not subordinate to him in the way his court would be. She's not someone trying to use him for political advantage. She's something entirely outside the system he's been operating in his whole life, a woman with her own knowledge and her own agenda, who seems to see him clearly, without either fearing or flattering him. For a man as deeply isolated as AY Mond has become, that might be the only kind of relationship left available to him. It doesn't make it healthy, but it might make it real in a way that nothing else in his life has been for quite some time. Meanwhile, Hulanar saw this coming. That's the thing about Hulanar Targaryen. Everything she says comes true, eventually. At the end of Season 2, she tells Alicent, in her quiet, slightly unfocused way, that AY Mond is afraid, that he knows he will die if he faces Rhaenyra's dragons. And she also tells him, when he threatens her, that she's already seen what happens to him. He gets swallowed up in the God's Eye and never seen again. She says this calmly, because she already knows. AY Mond characteristically denies being afraid. He always denies things that are plainly true about himself. It's one of the more consistent character beats in the show. He's deeply self-deceiving about his emotional state and utterly convinced that performing strength means having it. So he goes to Harrenhal, he burns the Riverlands, he meets Alice Rivers, and he's bought himself some time, but not against what's waiting for him over the God's Eye. The theory question for this section is, how dark does the show go with AY Mond's rampage? Through the Riverlands? Because in the book, the destruction is extensive and fairly senseless. The show will have to make a choice about whether to depict it fully or handle it more selectively. If they go full book, the audience is going to find it very difficult to maintain any remaining sympathy for AY Mond. If they pull back, he becomes a less honest portrayal of what happens when someone with AY Mond's psychology is given unlimited firepower and no oversight. I'd guess they find a middle path, perhaps showing one or two devastating burns with real human cost, rather than cataloguing the full extent of the damage. Either way, there is a lake in the middle of Westeros, and eventually he is going to fly toward it. Let's spend some time with the dragon seeds, because I think they're the most theoretically interesting part of Season 3, and also the part where the gap between the show and the book is most likely to produce genuinely surprising results. There are 3 of them riding for Rhaenyra's cause: Adam, Hugh and Ulf. Each one of them has a dragon that makes them enormously powerful, and at least 2 of them are going to betray her. Start with Adam of Hull because he's the most straightforward of the 3, and also the one who gets the most genuinely unjust treatment in the book. Adam is Corlys Fleury's illegitimate son. The show hasn't made this fully explicit, but it's been strongly implied through their interactions and through Corlys's visible emotional attachment to both Adam and his brother Alan. Adam claimed Sea Smoke, the dragon that used to belong to Fleury. Lys's late legitimate son, which in Fire and Blood is treated as evidence that Adam carries Lair Eon, or Targaryen blood. Because dragons don't accept riders without it, Adam is earnest. He wants to serve. He has grown up knowing roughly who his father is and never having been acknowledged by him, and yet he's not bitter about it the way Alyn is, or at least not in the same way. When Rhaenyra eventually accuses Adam of treason on the basis of something Ulf does, which we'll get to, it's one of the more painful miscarriages of justice in the whole book. Lys defends him, refuses to hand him over, and eventually helps him escape. And then Adam goes and does something genuinely heroic at the Battle of Tumbleton that complicates everything further. He's a good man navigating a story that is not kind to good men. Now, Ulf White. Ulf is a wonderful disaster of a character. He is a professional drinker of uncertain parentage who has somehow ended up bonded with Silverwing, a dragon that was once ridden by good Queen Alysanne, the beloved wife of old King Jaehaerys V, who by all accounts was a magnificent and gentle creature. The contrast between Silverwing's history and her current rider is rather striking. Ulf is greedy, vain, and already visibly intoxicated by the feeling of being someone important. In episode 1 of season 3, we see him riding Silverwing into battle at the Gullet like a man who's just discovered he can do anything he wants, which is accurate and also terrifying. The show has given Ulf a tragic backstory, abusive upbringing, spent his whole life being told he's nothing, which makes his imminent betrayal feel earned rather than arbitrary. He was never going to be satisfied with what Rhaenyra was willing to give him. In Fire and Blood, he and Hugh demand impossible things. Highgarden, one of the richest lordships in the realm, and when they don't get them, they flip. The show will almost certainly motivate this more specifically than the book does, but the destination is the same. And then there's Hugh Hammer, who is the most interesting of the three. Hugh is a blacksmith. He was living in King's Landing in season 2, watching his infant daughter die because the city's resources were stretched to nothing under a naval blockade that was, ironically, part of the war effort of the side he eventually ends up fighting for. He watched Rhaenyra's war grind the lives of ordinary people into dust, and then he bonded with Vermithor, one of the oldest and largest dragons on Team Black, and overnight became one of the most powerful individuals in Westeros. The show has made a specific narrative choice that the book didn't have room for. Hugh's wife. She has family in Tumbleton. This was mentioned explicitly in season 2 in a scene that felt, at the time, like a bit of character colour. But it was a plant. Tumbleton is a town in the Reach that is going to be central to one of season 3's biggest battles, and the theory, which feels very solidly grounded, is that whatever happens to Hugh's wife at Tumbleton is what finally breaks him. In the book, Hugh's betrayal comes partly from ego, and partly from sensing that Rhaenyra's paranoia is turning her against the dragon's seeds. But the show seems to be setting up something more emotionally specific. A man who is already ambivalent, who has seen his daughter die and his family suffer, and who finally loses the last person he loves in a fire that was technically started in Rhaenyra's name. That would make his flip from sympathetic to antagonist feel less like a character inconsistency and more like a completely understandable, totally destructive response to grief. Sound familiar? The show does love a mirror. Back in episode 1, we see all 3 dragon seeds near Harrenhal waiting. They were supposed to ambush Ay Mond when he arrived on Veoi Gar. They instead had an encounter with Alice Rivers, and a green man, a mysterious figure from the Isle of Faces, tied to the old magic of Westeros, which is a very strange detour for three guys who are ostensibly just there to fight. The Isle of Faces is where the first men and the children of the forest made their pact thousands of years before the events of the show, and green men are its guardians. Their appearance near the dragon seed suggests the old powers of Westeros are paying attention to what's happening, which is a layer of mysticism the show has been carefully threading through since Season 2. What does Rhaenyra do when she starts to suspect the dragon seeds? In the book, badly. She acts on incomplete information, is manipulated by people in her court who see the dragon seeds as threats, and ultimately makes decisions that are both unjust and strategically disastrous. Whether the show takes that route or gives her more information to work with, maybe warns her through Misari U, or through Alicent, or through whatever connection Rhaenyra maintains to events, is one of the genuinely open questions of the season. There's a specific moment in Fire and Blood that I'd love to see dramatised. When Rhaenyra orders Adam of Hull arrested on the grounds that a treasonous act committed by Ulf White somehow implicates Adam as well, which is the kind of logic that only makes sense when you're frightened and looking for something to control. Cor Lys Vuler on refuses. He's the hand of the Queen. He has genuine political standing, and he uses both to help his illegitimate son escape rather than surrender him to an accusation he knows to be false. This is Cor Lys choosing, at the end of his life, to acknowledge Adam in the only way left available to him, by protecting him at personal cost. He spent decades not publicly claiming his bastard sons. Now he's putting his position and his relationship with Rhaenyra on the line for one of them. The show has been building toward this through the Cor Lys Alyn storyline, their fractured relationship. Cor Lys apologising to Alyn at the gullet before the battle, acknowledging that he never gave them his name. Season 3 presumably continues that reckoning, and the Adam situation might be where it comes to a head. What happens to Cor Lys after this in the book is itself theoretically interesting. He survives the dance, which makes him one of the few people who started at the top of the power structure and ended there too. His survival is probably due to the combination of his political usefulness and his willingness to adapt. He switches sides when necessary. He backs down when the alternative is worse. He is strategic in ways that many of the other lords in this story are not. The show has given him an additional layer in Alyn and Adam that the book didn't quite have room for, and it will be interesting to see whether his arc ends the season intact or whether something in the coming battles finally claims the sea snake. Now let's talk about Criston Cole. Criston Cole is, depending on how generously you're reading him, either a man who made one terrible mistake early in his life that he never stopped paying for, or a man who made one terrible mistake and then compounded it for about 15 years by being petty and vindictive and attaching his bruised pride to the wrong side of a war. The show has been fairly balanced in its presentation of him. Fabian Frankel is too good an actor for the character to be purely a villain, but he is marching toward the end of his story, and he knows it. In the Season 2 finale, Criston tells Gwaine Hightower, Alicent's brother, who is actually one of the more morally grounded soldiers in this entire narrative, that he thinks they're marching toward annihilation. He says it matter-of-factly, with the resigned air of a man who's been expecting bad news for a while. Gwaine calls him on carrying Alicent's handkerchief, which means breaking his Kingsguard vows, and Criston's response is essentially, "Yes, I know. I have made many choices that contradict my ideals, and here we are, He's going to die at something called the Butcher's Ball. In Fire and Blood, the Butcher's Ball happens when Criston Cole's army, which has been marching through the Riverlands, winning small engagements and trying to reach Ormond Hightower's forces in the south, runs into the Winter Wolves. Remember the Winter Wolves? Cregan Stark sent them down from the north, back in Season 2's first episode, old veterans, experienced fighters, men who've been walking the length of Westeros since then. They weren't the main event when Jace enlisted them at the Wall. They've been the background of the war. This is their payoff. The Blacks outman the Greens by roughly 2-1 at the battle site. Criston tries to negotiate. He offers his sword, a formal surrender. He even offers single combat, which is a very knightly and somewhat anachronistic response to a situation where the other side has no interest in chivalry. He's met with arrows instead. The battle that follows is described as butchery, not battle, by the chroniclers, which is where the name comes from. It's not elegant, it's not honourable, it's just the end of an army and the man leading it. Gwaine Hightower is with Cole during this. What happens to him is less clear. In Fire and Blood, Gwaine survives the dance eventually, which would mean the show needs to find a way to get him out of the Butcher's Ball, either injured or captured, or simply not present at the worst of it. The show has rather liked Gwaine as a foil for Cole, giving him the decency and the moral clarity that Cole is always reaching for, but can't quite maintain. So there might be something worth doing with Gwaine after Cole is gone. Roderick Dustin, Roddy the Ruin, Tommy Flanagan is playing him, leads the Blacks in this engagement. He appeared briefly in episode 1, in a scene where he presents Daemon with the head of Jason Lannister, which Daemon receives with a kind of grim satisfaction. Roddy is one of those supporting characters who exists in the book primarily as a function of his actions rather than his personality. And the show is visibly building him as a presence. He's got the bearing of a man who has fought long enough that war has simply become his natural state. The broader significance of the Butcher's Ball isn't just the death of Criston Cole, significant as that is. It's what it means for the Green cause overall. With Criston gone, the Greens lose their primary military organiser on the ground. Mond is operating as a solo agent of destruction rather than a coordinated commander. Ormond Hightower is advancing from the south with his army, but he's doing it without a Hand of the King coordinating the overall strategy. The Greens are fragmenting, several parts moving independently, without anyone holding the whole shape of the war together. Criston Cole's death is satisfying not because he deserved to die badly. The show is too nuanced for simple satisfaction like that, but because it closes a loop that opened in Season 1, when he and Rhaenyra were close, when he had a different future available to him, and when he chose something else. He became the Hand of the King, who was always better suited to being a knight. And a knight's ending, even a messy and inglorious one, is probably the most honest conclusion for him. One thing I want to note about the broader Riverlands campaign that gets underplayed in discussions of this period, the Winter Wolves are more significant than they might initially appear. Cregan Stark sent them, the Greybeards, the veterans, and they've been walking south since Season 2. They were a reluctant concession from a northern lord who prioritised the Wall over southern politics. They are, in a sense, the embodied form of the North's obligation. We gave an oath, we're honouring it, we don't have to like it. The show has treated the northern angle of this war fairly lightly, which is understandable given how many other threads are running simultaneously. But the arrival of the Winter Wolves at the Butcher's Ball is the North finally arriving in the war, and Roderick Dustin leading them, a Lord of the North, fighting and dying for a queen he's never met. in a war over a throne the North has no real stake in, is a very Westerosi kind of loyalty. You gave your word. Your word matters more than your comfort or your survival. The North remembers. And in this case, they remember the oath Cregan's father gave when Rhaenyra was named heir. I'd be surprised if the show doesn't find a way to acknowledge that weight. A brief scene with Roderick before or after the Butcher's Ball that doesn't sentimentalise it but doesn't ignore it either. Something that says these men came a very long way for a cause they didn't entirely choose, and they got the job done. That's the Westerosi North in miniature. Now we're getting into the part of the season I'm most curious about, and possibly most apprehensive about, in the best possible way. The Battle of Tumbleton, or more precisely, the first Battle of Tumbleton, because there are going to be two, is expected to be one of Season 3's major set pieces after the Gullet. And it is a genuinely complicated event in Fire and Blood, because it involves betrayal, dragonfire, and a town that gets burned by the people who are ostensibly defending it. Here's what happens. Tumbleton is a market town in the Reach, positioned between King's Landing and the south, which makes it strategically important as a point of control against a Hightower army advancing from Old Town. The Blacks garrison it. The Greens, led by Ormond Hightower and his army, supported by the young Prince Daeron Targaryen, EN, and his dragon Targaryen, attack. And then Hugh Hammer and Ulf White turn. In the middle of the battle, with the Blacks apparently well positioned, the two dragon seeds switch sides. Their dragons, Vumathor and Silverwing, two of the largest on Team Black, start burning the Black defenders. The town of Tumbleton is torched. It's described in Fire and Blood as one of the most chaotic and devastating single moments of the dance, because nobody could have anticipated it, and because two of Rhaenyra's most powerful assets suddenly became weapons against her. The show has been quietly building to this for a while. Hugh's connection to Tumbleton through his wife, mentioned in Season 2, makes this personal rather than just mercenary. And Ulf's ego and sense of entitlement have been visible since the moment he got on Silverwing. The question is whether the show also needs some external trigger. Does something specific happen at Tumbleton that pushes Hugh over the edge? Most theories point to his wife being caught in the fire, possibly killed in a particularly devastating inversion. Hugh Hammer's dragon kills the last person he was still fighting for. That's the kind of storytelling the show tends to favour. Not arbitrary betrayal, but betrayal with a cause that you can understand, even as you watch the consequences unfold. Ormond Hightower leads the Greens here. James Norton has just joined the cast for Season 3. As Ormond, he's Alicent's nephew, Otto's nephew as well, and he's described in the trailers and early press materials as the kind of confident, imperious commander who has been raised his entire life to expect to win. James Norton is quite a significant casting choice for a character who in the book dies at Tumbleton. That's the thing. Ormond Hightower dies in the first Battle of Tumbleton, killed by Roderick Dustin in what becomes a muddled, multi-sided catastrophe, but the show hired James Norton. James Norton is not a one-episode guest star kind of actor, so either they've changed when Ormond dies, or they've significantly expanded his role before his death, or there's something about his arc that differs enough from the book that he has more time. It's not hard to see Ormond as a character who could carry several episodes, a competent, proud Hightower general who has to watch the strategy unravel around him through no particular fault of his own, is inherently compelling. And then there's Daeron, Prince Daeron Targaryen EEN, and his dragon Targaryen fight at Tumbleton. In the book, Targaryen is described as the Blue Queen, a dragon of striking sapphire blue colour, who is somewhat smaller than the oldest beasts, but genuinely impressive in her own right. Daeron rides her well. He's a capable young soldier, earnest in a way that none of his brothers quite are. We saw Targaryen's colours briefly in the background of a Season 2 scene. That was our only hint of them both. In Season 3, we apparently finally meet Daeron properly. Here's what I find fascinating about Daeron as a character. He's been present in the narrative as a fact for 3 seasons without ever appearing on screen. Everyone knows about him. Alicent has mentioned him. Kristen has mentioned him. The war councils have factored in his dragon, but we've never actually seen him. For Alicent, he represents the child she still has who hasn't been disfigured or driven half mad by events. For the Greens, he represents a capable commander with a dragon at a time when their capable commanders are dying. His introduction in Season 3 is going to be either a major addition to the show's ensemble or a brief but impactful presence, depending on how closely the show follows Fire and Blood's timeline for his story. The aftermath of the first Battle of Tumbleton is significant beyond the body count too. Hugh and Ulf don't just betray Rhaenyra and leave, they stay in Tumbleton and start behaving as if they've won their own kingdom. Ulf wants Highgarden. Hugh apparently has ambitions that are less specific, but no less grandiose. They're not really working for the Greens so much as for themselves, which complicates the Greens' position even as it damages the Blacks. The show's version of this, if it follows the broad structure, will leave Tumbleton as a kind of contested no man's land of dragon-fueled chaos, with the outcome of the battle benefiting nobody cleanly. One last note on this section. Showrunner Ryan Condal confirmed that Season 3 has 4 major book events he was building toward. Given what's already aired, those 4 are almost certainly the Battle of the Gullet, the Fall of King's Landing, the First Battle of Tumbleton, and at least one more, almost certainly the Storming of the Dragon Pit, which we'll get to. The fact that Condal has been explicit about aiming for these specific moments suggests the season is quite structurally coherent in a way that Season 2 sometimes wasn't. But I want to spend a moment more on Hugh specifically, because his arc between now and Tumbleton is the one I'm most genuinely curious about. The show has made him into a man with a real moral foundation. He wanted justice. He wanted his daughter to live. He wanted the people in King's Landing's lower levels to be seen by the people in its upper ones. He got a dragon, which gave him power. And the question of what power does to a person with that kind of foundational grievance is one the show has been circling. There's a prophecy attached to Hugh in some versions of the book's accounts, a fortune teller or wise woman of some kind telling him he's destined for great things, that he has king's blood in his veins. In Fire and Blood, this ambiguously suggests that Hugh Hammer might have genuine Targaryen ancestry, rather than simply a fluke bond with Vermithor. The show didn't lean heavily on this in Season 2, but it could use it in Season 3 to give Hugh's arc a specific direction. A man who's been told he could be a king, who gets a taste of what power feels like, who loses the thing that kept him human, and then pursues the prophecy because there's nothing left to pursue instead. A man becoming a monster because the world took everything from him and then offered him fire is not exactly a new story. But the best versions of not exactly new stories are told with enough specific detail that they feel fresh. And Hugh's specifics, the blacksmith's hands, the dead daughter, the wife in Tumbleton, the quiet nobility that the show keeps catching him in when he thinks nobody's looking, are interesting enough that his betrayal could be genuinely devastating rather than just expected. The aftermath of the First Battle of Tumbleton also sets up a particular kind of stalemate. The Blacks' hold on the region between King's Landing and the south is broken. The Hightower army is still operational, and Hugh and Ulf are sitting in a burned town, apparently deciding what to do with their dragons and their ambitions. And Rhaenyra in King's Landing is going to have to respond to news of this betrayal with a court that is already starting to fracture around her. Since we've just arrived at Tumbleton with Daeron's army, it seems like the right moment to actually dwell on him for a bit, because Daeron Targaryen is one of the odder narrative situations in this show's history. He is Alicent and Visire ISS's fourth child. He was sent as a boy to Old Town to be fostered with the Hightower household, which is a fairly standard Westerosi arrangement for younger children of noble families. You place them in the household of a powerful ally, they learn things, they form connections, and everybody benefits. In Daeron's case, the specific Hightower lord in question eventually becomes his patron and military commander, Ormond Hightower. The first 2 seasons of House of the Dragon featured Alicent worrying about Daeron, mentioning him in passing, referencing him in conversations as "my youngest son," and sometimes as though she's reminding herself that she still has one intact child left. We've heard about his dragon Tessarion the Blue Queen. We've heard that he's capable and well liked, and we've seen exactly nothing of him. Now in the Westerosi source material, Daeron the Daring, which is what they call him, because apparently the Targaryens give all their children nicknames that rhyme nicely, is described as genuinely admirable. He's the youngest of Alicent's sons and seems to have inherited almost none of the toxicity that Awy Gon and Awy Mond have developed in different ways. He's dutiful, he's good in battle, he's kind to his men. He and his dragon are reportedly excellent together. The interesting theory question is, what does the show do with him now that he's finally arriving? He's been a ghost in the narrative for 3 seasons, and his introduction at this point of the war is inherently loaded. Alicent doesn't know where he is or how he's doing. She's been in King's Landing and then effectively a prisoner of Rhaenyra's court. Her youngest son has been marching toward a war that his mother has been trying to end from the opposite side. In Fire and Blood, Daeron's story doesn't end at Tumbleton. He survives the first battle there, though his role is complicated by the Dragon Seed's betrayal and the general chaos that follows. His ultimate fate is tied to the second Battle of Tumbleton, which is expected to be in Season 4. So the show is presumably going to give us Daeron across 2 seasons, which means he needs enough character to sustain that. One theory I've seen discussed, which I find genuinely interesting, is that the show uses Daeron as a mirror for what Awy Gon could have been. Awy Gon got drunk and lecherous and was handed a crown he never earned. Daeron got a decent education, a good mentor, and a dragon he bonded with properly. He's what happens when the Targaryen genetics land in a slightly more stable environment. Putting him in scenes with Awy Gon at any point, and events might conspire to bring them into proximity in Season 4, would be a fascinating character study. The other thing about Daeron is what he means for Alicent. She's been making decisions since the very beginning of this show, based on what was good for her children. Her eldest Awy Gon is missing and injured. Her second son Awy Mond is a psychological catastrophe, burning his way through the Riverlands. Her daughter Hugh Rhaenyra is deteriorating quietly. And somewhere out there, marching north, is a son she loves, who is riding a beautiful blue dragon into a battle she didn't want and can't stop. If the show manages to get Alicent into any kind of contact with Daeron before the season ends, that scene is going to be something quite special. And then there's Tessarion herself. Dragons in this show are characters in their own right. The bond between rider and dragon is genuinely affecting, and we've seen how the deaths of dragons land emotionally in ways that go beyond simple spectacle. Targaryen hasn't been seen yet. Her introduction alongside Daeron is going to be a moment. Sapphire blue colouring, apparently, which would make her visually distinctive in a cast of dragons that run mostly to red and bronze. I'm unreasonably invested in seeing what she looks like in the show's aesthetic. There's a smaller but rather poignant aspect of Daeron's position that I don't think gets talked about enough. He's been away from his family since childhood. He didn't grow up watching AY Gon and AY Mond and Rhaenyra navigate court. He didn't watch his mother age and be sidelined and find her way back to something like agency in Season 2's finale. He's been in Old Town, training, learning, growing up in the Hightower household. He knows his family through letters and messages and reputation. He knows his mother as a political figure, at least as much as he knows her as a person. When he eventually, if he eventually, comes face to face with any of them in Season 3 or 4, there will be a gap there. Not hostility, necessarily, but the particular strangeness of reconnecting with people who should be your family and finding that you're mostly strangers. AY Gon and AY Mond are strangers, to him in personality, even if not in blood. Rhaenyra is a sister he may remember vaguely from childhood. His mother is a woman he knows primarily through the mythological version of her that the Green Cause has constructed. This could be very rich material if the show decides to explore it, or it might not be the focus, given everything else that's happening. But even a few scenes that acknowledge the distance, Daeron referencing something about his childhood in Old Town or Ormond Hightower, revealing what kind of man he thinks Alicent is compared to what Daeron assumed, would add a layer to what might otherwise be a fairly functional military character. Let's talk about Rhaenyra. She's been in the background of this war since the beginning, present at the table, but never the one setting the agenda, watching things happen that she already knows are going to happen, unable to stop any of it. Her dragon dreams have been a consistent thread through both seasons. She predicts her son's murder. She predicts AY Mond's death. She says things in empty rooms that sound like nonsense until they're not. Thea Sabin plays her with a very specific kind of interior distance, like someone who has received too much information about the world and has had to build a wall between knowing and feeling in order to function. She is, in a lot of ways, the most sympathetic person in King's Landing right now. She didn't want this war. She didn't want any of it. She was married to her brother, watched her son killed, and has been dragged through events over which she has no control whatsoever. What the book says about Rhaenyra's end is one of the most debated passages in Fire and Blood. According to the chronicles, Rhaenyra dies during Rhaenyra's reign in King's Landing. The specific account says she throws herself from a window of Maegor's holdfast, landing in the dry moat below. It's described as a suicide. The timing in the book comes after months of deterioration. She stopped eating properly, stopped speaking coherently, stopped seeming to recognise people around her. She was already, by most accounts, not entirely present by the time she died. But then there's the political dimension, because the small folk of King's Landing don't believe it was a suicide. They believe Rhaenyra had her killed. And whether that belief is accurate or not, it becomes the match that lights the storming of the Dragon Pit. The show has invested considerably in Rhaenyra as a character. She's much more present, much more vividly drawn than in the book's scholarly history. So her ending is going to carry emotional weight that the book's version doesn't quite have. The question is how the show handles the ambiguity Does it make clear that it was suicide? Does it leave space for the audience to wonder? Or does it do something the book doesn't do and actually dramatise the specific moment and everything that led to it? One of the theories circulating, and I find it quite compelling, is that the show will show us Rhaenyr's final act from her own perspective as a kind of release. Not triumphant, but lucid. She saw it coming. She may have chosen it specifically, deliberately, knowing what her death would cause, which would make it, in the context of her dragon dreaming, almost an act of agency. The one thing she could do that had a guaranteed outcome, in a life where everything else has been taken from her. There's also the matter of her dragon, Dreamfire. In the book, Dreamfire is housed in the dragon pit, and when the mob storms the pit, Dreamfire breaks her chains, trying to reach her rider, presumably sensing what happened to Rhaenyr. The timing of the two events is close enough in the book that the two deaths are intertwined, one following the other almost immediately. The show will probably handle this in the same sequence, which means Dreamfire's story is also ending here. Alicent, watching all of this from wherever she is in Rhaenyr's court, is going to be at the end of something. 3 of her children lost or broken, one somewhere far south she can't reach. She started the series as a girl who wanted nothing more than to be a good wife and mother and loyal friend. She's going to end it, or at least this season, having watched nearly everything she built collapse. Olivia Cook has been exceptional throughout, and whatever the show does in Alicent's final episodes, she'll make it count. There is something I keep coming back to about Rhaenyr specifically, and it's this: dragon dreaming in the Targaryen family is not a gift in the way that phrase usually implies. It's not a power that lets you prevent things. Rhaenyr doesn't dream the future and then get to change it. She dreams it and then watches it happen. She told everyone about Jaehaerys, and nobody understood what she was saying until it was too late. She told Awash about the God's Eye, and he denied it. She's been living in the knowledge of catastrophe for what appears to be years now, unable to share it in any form that would be useful, watching people die in exactly the ways she foresaw. That specific experience, knowing and being unable to act on knowing, is one of the more quietly devastating things the show has built for her. It's not the grand tragedy of Rhaenyra losing her sons or Alicent watching her family destroy itself. It's something smaller and more continuous, the daily weight of a knowledge you can't use and can't put down. The show found the humanity in Visire Ice's slow physical decline. It found the humanity in Daemon's fractured pride. I hope it finds the humanity in Rhaenyr's epistemological prison in the same way. One small thing I want to note, and it feels relevant in this section. The show gave Rhaenyr an Awash son, Jaehaerys, who was killed in the Blood and Cheese incident in the Season 2 opening. In the book that scene happens differently. There's a daughter too, Jaehaera, who survives the night and has a significant later role in the story. The show simplified this by removing Jaehaera from the narrative entirely. Whether that decision echoes later, whether the absence of a surviving daughter of Awash and Rhaenyr matters for the eventual resolution of the war and the succession, is another open question. The book suggests that Jaehaera's existence matters quite a bit for what comes after. Without her, the show's version of events post-war is going to look somewhat different, and here we arrive at what might be Season 3's most devastating event, or possibly its final one. The timing is genuinely uncertain from where we're standing, with 7 episodes still to air. The storming of the Dragon Pit. In Fire and Blood, this happens during Rhaenyr's reign in King's Landing, after her position has begun to deteriorate. The small folk of the city are starving. The naval blockade that Corlys ran so effectively in her name has had the secondary effect of cutting off supplies to ordinary people who are already struggling. Rhaenyra, Euhor's new court, has brought new expenses and new faces and new demands on a city that was already in a poor state. And then Rhaenyra dies and rumour spreads that the queen had her killed. The mob forms in the streets. They're angry, specifically. They're angry at dragons, because dragons are what this war has been about, and dragons are why their children are hungry and their homes are rubble. There's something primal and understandable in that anger, even as what it leads to is catastrophic. They storm the dragon pit, the ancient structure on the hill of Rhaenys, where the Targaryen dragons have been housed for generations, armed with torches, weapons, whatever they had to hand. They kill the dragons inside. Tyraxes, the young dragon that belonged to Rhaenyra's son, Joffrey Valerion, Stormcloud, a hatchling, and others. They kill Dreamfire, Rhaenyra's dragon, who's been trying to break her chains to reach her dead rider. And then there is Syrax, Rhaenyra's dragon, the one she bonded with before the series began, the gold dragon who has been her companion across everything, who she rode into battles, who she landed on Dragonstone, who she flew to Harrenhal. Syrax flies to the dragon pit when the rioting starts, and she dies there, in the chaos, killed by the mob. In fire and blood, Rhaenyra's son Joffrey tries to claim a dragon during this chaos, Tyrax's apparently, and falls to his death. The show has kept Joffrey as a character in the background. The youngest of Rhaenyra's sons by Laenor, who has barely been seen but exists. His death at the dragon pit would mean Rhaenyra has now lost 3 sons in the space of a single season. The loss of Syrax is the one that changes everything. Rhaenyra without Syrax is not a queen with a dragon. She's just a queen in a hostile city, with enemies closing in from every direction, with her most powerful weapon gone. The storming strips her of the thing that made her claim militarily viable, and it does so because of an action taken not by her enemies, but by the people she was supposed to be ruling. Theory time. Does Season 3 actually end here, with the storming of the dragon pit and Rhaenyra's flight from King's Landing? Or does the storming happen mid-season and we get more? Ryan Condal has said Season 3 covers a significant chunk of the dance, so it's quite possible the season doesn't end with this event, but with something after it. The exact pacing of the 8 episodes is still mostly unknown. Episode 1 took care of the gullet, and the title of the final episode of the season hasn't been confirmed, which would tell us a great deal. What we know from the Weeks Ahead trailer is that the season features Rhaenyra taking King's Landing, AY Mond operating in the Riverlands, battles in multiple locations, and significant character deaths. The trailer also shows Alicent and her Rhaenyra apparently fleeing or hiding, which could be before or after the storming. If I had to guess, and this is very much a guess, I'd say Season 3 ends with Rhaenyra fleeing King's Landing after the storming, probably in some kind of desperate final episode that mirrors the beginning of her story. She started this show as a princess who flew freely on Syrax, who had a future and a dragon and a father who loved her. She loses King's Landing, not in a great battle, but in a riot, and she loses the thing that has defined her since childhood. That's a season finale that earns its devastation. There's something worth noting about the Dragon Pit specifically, since it's where so much of this ends. It was built by Maegor the Cruel, one of the most violent and erratic kings in Targaryen history, whose name keeps getting invoked as a comparison for rulers who govern through fear, as a home for the royal dragons. Before the Dragon Pit existed, the dragons roosted on Dragonstone, which kept them at a remove from King's Landing and from the ordinary life of the city. Maegor brought them into the capital, into the hill that overlooks Flea Bottom, into the daily sight and sound and smell of everyone living in the city below. This is sometimes pointed to as the beginning of the end for the Targaryen dragons. Bringing them into the city meant they were no longer mythic creatures glimpsed in the sky. They were neighbours, dangerous, enormous, fire-breathing neighbours who your children could see from your window. That proximity bred a particular kind of relationship with the small folk. Not reverence exactly, but coexistence. And coexistence can tip into violence much more easily than reverence can. When the mob storms the dragon pit, they're not attacking an abstract symbol. They're attacking something they've lived alongside for generations and have now decided to blame for everything that's happened to them. It's the most understandable mass action in the whole dance in some ways, and also one of the most tragic. They destroy the last significant collection of dragons. After the dance, House Targaryen still has dragons, there are survivors and eggs, but they never recover the numbers or the scale they had before. The storming of the dragon pit is the moment when the Targaryen dynasty begins its slow turn toward the world that Game of Thrones eventually inhabits, a world where dragons are memory and legend, not fire and blood in the sky. The show knows this. It knows that the audience watching it has already seen where this leads. To Darnar Ises, to 3 eggs hatching in a fire, to 3 dragons reclaiming what was lost over 200 years. That's why Daemon's vision at Harrenhal was so significant. The show is explicitly linking these events to that future. The storming of the dragon pit isn't just a sad event in a fictional civil war. In the mythology of this whole universe, it's the beginning of a very long night. There is a lake in the middle of Westeros, the God's Eye, and above it, at some point in the Dance of the Dragons, Daemon and Awaymond are going to kill each other. This is the moment that fans of Fire and Blood have been waiting for since before the show was even in production. It's one of the most dramatically charged confrontations in the source material. 2 men who have been circling each other for years, each with enormous dragons, finally going directly at one another over a body of water that has sacred significance in Westerosi mythology. Here's what the book says. Daemon summons Awaymond to the God's Eye. The message he sends, delivered by an old man, apparently, to avoid being intercepted, essentially challenges Awaymond to single combat above the lake. Come to the God's Eye. Come alone, dragon against dragon, and let's end this. Awaymond accepts because Awaymond is constitutionally incapable of backing down from a challenge, and because somewhere in him he has already understood that this is how his story ends. He goes to Harrenhal. He waits. Daemon comes at night, on Curaxes, and then they fight. Curaxes and Vhagar are extraordinarily well matched in terms of age and experience, even though Vhagar is the larger dragon. Curaxes is described as unusually aggressive and battle-tested, a bloodworm who has fought for years. The 2 dragons tear each other apart over the lake. Both take catastrophic wounds. Curaxes, dying but not dead, makes it to the shore of the God's Eye before expiring. Vhagar crashes into the lake itself. Aemond's body is found at the bottom of the lake, with Daemon's sword, Dark Sister, through his eye. The same eye he lost as a boy, in the same castle where a young Lucerys cut it out. He dies having the first thing taken from him be the last thing taken from him. The full circle of it is devastating and a little bit perfect. Daemon's body is never found. Curaxes is found on the shore. There is no body in the lake, no remains anywhere. The book offers multiple explanations. He died in the fall, and his body simply wasn't discovered. He somehow survived and lived out his life somewhere else in secret. No account agrees. And I love that Martin chose to leave it there, unresolved, because it's entirely appropriate for a man who spent his life refusing to be contained or fully known. Or now, the big theory question for this section is, Season 3 or Season 4? Episode 1 has already planted seeds for the confrontation. The God's Eye is referenced geographically in dialogue. Laenar's prophecy about Ay Mond being swallowed up by the lake is fresh in the audience's memory, and the Dragon Seeds plotline near Harrenhal, where they were waiting to ambush Ay Mond, puts all the relevant pieces in proximity. But here's the practical consideration. If Season 3 ends with Rhaenyra fleeing King's Landing, as many expect, then there's a whole Season 4 ahead that needs to cover. The aftermath of the storming, Rhaenyra's death, Ay Gon-2's eventual return, and his own death, and the resolution of the succession. That's a lot of material, and the battle above the God's Eye, being the kind of spectacular confrontation it is, might work better as Season 4's opening or mid-season centrepiece than as something tucked into the final episodes of Season 3 alongside everything else that's happening. My personal theory, if you'll indulge me, is that the show holds the God's Eye fight for Season 4. It's too significant to deploy in the last 2 episodes of a season already containing the fall of King's Landing, Tumbleton and the storming. Spreading it to Season 4 gives that final season an immediate, enormous event to anchor itself. And it keeps Ay Mond, who is one of the show's most compelling ongoing presences, alive through the end of Season 3. Which means Season 3's cliffhanger may very well be Ay Mond still out there, Vhagar still in the sky, the most dangerous threat to Rhaenyra still unresolved. That said, I've been wrong about pacing before. The show has surprised me consistently. If they manage to fit the God's Eye into Season 3 in a way that doesn't feel rushed, it would absolutely work. One thing is certain, whenever it happens, it will be the most expensive thing this show has ever built. 2 ancient dragons killing each other at night over a sacred lake. Ryan Condal has described it as one of the sequences he's been building towards since the beginning. The visual effects team will have been given everything they need. It's going to be staggering. The God's Eye itself is worth a moment of attention because its mythology is part of why the confrontation there carries so much weight in the book. The God's Eye is the largest lake in Westeros, and at its centre sits the Isle of Faces, a tiny island covered in massive weirwood trees, all of them carved with the faces of the old gods. It's where 12,000 years before the events of this show, the first men and the children of the forest made their pact. An accord to end the wars between them, sealed by the green seers of the children. The Isle of Faces is arguably the most spiritually significant location in Westeros, older than any of the nations, older than most of the religions. The green men who appeared to the Dragon Seeds in Episode 1 of Season 3 are the Isle's guardians. Their presence near the Dragon Seeds wasn't a coincidence in the narrative. The show is connecting the events of the dance, this very human civil war over thrones and succession, to the deeper, older magic of the continent. When Daemon and Ay Mond fight above the God's Eye, they fight above the place where the world's oldest peace was made. There is something in that juxtaposition that feels intentional and quite resonant. It also means that whatever spiritual mechanics the show is working with, the green sight, the prophecies, the visions Daemon had at Harrenhal, the things Laenar sees, are all somehow connected to the same source. The children of the forest, the old gods, the Weirwood network. The show hasn't been heavy-handed about this, but it's been consistent. Mysticism in this story runs through very specific channels, and the God's Eye sits at the convergence of several of them. Whether Daemon's disappearance after the battle is explained within that mystical framework, whether the show suggests he didn't die so much as pass into something else, the way certain figures in myth simply cease to appear in the historical record, is a tantalising possibility. I'm not sure the show will go there. It might be too abstract for a series that generally handles its supernatural elements at arm's length, but the option exists, and it's there in the material if they choose to reach for it. We should probably check in on AY Gone too, because wherever he is very much still a problem. At the end of Season 2, Larys Strong put him in a covered wagon and got him out of King's Landing before Alicent's deal with Rhaenyra could be executed. AY Gone is burned, injured, missing fingers apparently, and emotionally humiliated by everything that's happened to him since he was handed a crown. He didn't want to be king in the first place. That's one of the show's more interesting choices, making AY Gone not a power-hungry usurper, but a man who stumbled into a position he didn't ask for, and has been failing to hold ever since. And now, he's on the run with Larys Strong, hiding in wagons, dodging Rhaenyra's forces, trying not to die. In Episode 2's preview images, we see AY Gone and Larys together, apparently evading capture, with some success, peeking out of a wagon in what various reviewers have described as almost comically, which honestly is very on brand for these two. Larys is probably the most capable schemer in the entire story, and he's hitched that capability to AY Gone for reasons that have never been entirely clear, because Larys doesn't do anything out of genuine loyalty. He does things for positioning, for information, for leverage. What does Larys actually want? It's the question the show has been asking without definitively answering for 2 seasons. He wants power, obviously, but power over what? He's a man whose clubfoot excluded him from the physical world of knighthood and battle, who retreated instead into information and manipulation. He killed his own father and brother to give Alicent what she needed, or to give himself leverage over Alicent. He's been feeding AY Gone intelligence, and now he's apparently committed to keeping him alive and eventually returning him to power. One theory is that Larys' endgame is Harroway's town. He became Lord of Harrenhal when his family died in a fire he arranged, and that position gives him something real and lasting regardless of who sits the throne. Another theory is that Larys is simply running the longest possible hedge. He'll stay with AY Gone as long as AY Gone has a viable path back, and he'll find the exit door if that changes. He is not a man you want to have depending on your survival. Now Sunfire. AY Gone's dragon was last seen badly injured after Rook's Rest, curled around AY Gone's body in the forest, possibly dying. In Fire and Blood, Sunfire survives, badly scarred, one wing partly crippled, but alive, and he eventually reunites with AY Gone. The dragon's survival is actually quite important for the final phase of the war, because AY Gone uses Sunfire in his eventual return to reclaim King's Landing. But the show hasn't confirmed whether Sunfire is alive or dead. If they're departing from the book in this respect, AY Gone's path back to relevance is significantly more complicated. Otto Hightower's situation is also worth dwelling on in this section, because Otto is the architect of all of this, and he's sitting in a cell somewhere while the consequences of his architecture rain down on everyone else. He was dismissed as Hand of the King by AY Mond after Season 2's Episode 2, sent to Highgarden to court the Tyrells, and then disappeared from the narrative, only to appear briefly at the very end of Season 2 awake in a dark room. captive. Nobody's confirmed his captor. Nobody's confirmed his location. The most compelling theory is Larys. Larys would absolutely have had Otto taken and held somewhere as a strategic resource. Otto knows everything about the Green Cause, has connections across Westeros, and his intelligence is enormously valuable. Having him alive and accessible is useful. Having him free and operating independently is a risk. Larys doesn't take risks he doesn't have to. What happens to Otto when King's Landing falls? If Rhaenyra takes the city and Larys's current position becomes untenable, does Otto get released? Does he get handed over? The show has Rhys Ifans playing Otto with a very specific quality of calculating patience, even in his brief Season 2 appearances. You get the sense of a man who is always already 10 steps ahead of the next problem. A man like that, in a cell with time to think, is planning something. Whether he gets to execute that plan before events overtake him is a good question. There's a line from the book about Otto Hightower that I find rather apt. He was described as a man who loved House Hightower more than he loved his children, and his children more than he loved the realm, which is a fairly accurate summary of how he's operated throughout. He sacrificed Alicent's happiness to put her next to a king. He sacrificed Rhaenys's just claim to the throne to maintain Targaryen patriarchal succession. He worked his whole life for a position that put his family at the heart of power. And now here he is in a cell, watching that position collapse from the outside. There might be something almost quietly just about that, if you're in a particular mood. There's a line in the Season 3 trailer, Awash saying something like, "Every one of my miseries is of his making, and I swear I'm going to find him and kill him." He's talking about Awash, which means that whatever the logistics of Awash's situation, his primary emotional driver is now revenge against his own brother. The fraternal relationship between Awash and Awash has been one of the show's quieter ongoing tensions. Awash's performative disdain, Awash's contemptuous superiority, and the wound of Rook's Rest between them now. That they ended up on the same side of a war while managing to genuinely hate each other is almost impressively dysfunctional. The trajectory in Fire and Blood eventually brings Awash back into play in a significant way. He's the last Green King standing when the dance ends, technically. The resolution of the succession question involves Awash in ways that the show will have to navigate, particularly given the absence of Jaehaera, but that's Season 4 territory. For now, Awash is in a wagon somewhere outside King's Landing, injured and furious, and Larys Strong is driving. And now we get to perhaps the most genuinely open theory territory in the whole season, because Rhaenyra Targaryen and her dragon sheep stealer are heading somewhere the book doesn't quite map. In Fire and Blood, the character who rides sheep stealer is a girl named Nettles, a dragon seed, someone who claimed the wild dragon through patience and raw mutton offerings over weeks before any of the more formal dragon seed program existed. Nettles is one of the most intriguing figures in Martin's history, precisely because so little about her is certain. Her parentage is debated. Is she actually Targaryen blood, or did she claim sheep stealer through some other means? Her relationship with Daemon is debated, and what happened to her is entirely unknown. She's described as brown, which in the context of Westeros almost certainly suggests ancestry outside the Seven Kingdoms. And she's young and fierce and entirely self-made. The show cut Nettles from the story and gave Sheepstealer to Rhaenyra instead, which makes sense from a cast management perspective. Phoebe Campbell is an established presence, and the show has been developing Rhaenar's character and adding another young woman to bond with a dragon and have a complicated relationship with Daemon would have been a lot. But it means that Rhaenar's arc in Season 3 is now its own thing, informed by Nettles' storyline, but not identical to it. What we know, Rhaenar claimed Sheepstealer in Episode 1 of Season 3 after spending the previous season chasing him. She flew him into the Battle of the Gullet, and Sheepstealer's wild, ungovernable nature inadvertently contributed to Jace's death. He attacked indiscriminately, went for Baela and Vermax as well as the Triarchy ships. Rhaenar couldn't control him. That incident is going to hang over her entire arc. She wanted a dragon. She got one. And the first time she rode him into a real battle, her uncontrolled dragon contributed to the death of her betrothed. Because Jace and Baela were betrothed, and Baela is Rhaenar's sister. And the fallout from that, the guilt, the grief, the accusations that will inevitably come, is Rhaenar's burden to carry. In the Nettles storyline of Fire and Blood, she ends up at Harrenhal with Daemon during his time there. They share food, they ride together, and there are accounts suggesting their relationship became romantic, though as always with Fire and Blood, the accounts don't agree. Rhaenyra, hearing of this from what are probably not entirely reliable sources, sends an order to have Nettles arrested. Daemon countermands the order and lets Nettles escape on Sheepstealer, rather than hand her over to the Queen's justice. What this means for the show's version, with Rhaenyra in the Nettles role, is deeply unclear. A romantic relationship between Rhaenyra and Daemon is obviously off the table, in a way that the Nettles version wasn't. Rhaenyra is Daemon's daughter by his first wife, Laenor. But some version of Rhaenyra owes paranoia turning on Rhaenyra seems plausible, particularly if Rhaenyra is already suspicious of the dragon seeds, and Sheepstealer's role in Jace's death gives her a reason to distrust Rhaenyra specifically. There's a theory, which I find emotionally resonant, if not entirely provable, that the show ends Rhaenyra's Season 3 arc with her being sent away from King's Landing. Maybe not in disgrace exactly, but away. To somewhere she needs to go, or somewhere she's sent to be safe, or somewhere she chooses because the court has become untenable. The book has Nettles eventually fly away on Sheepstealer, destination unknown, dragon unseen again after that point. Sheepstealer becomes one of the great mysteries. Where did he go? Did he survive? Is there a wild dragon out there somewhere that used to belong to the most compelling character in Fire and Blood? If the show ends Rhaenyr's story on a similarly open note, it would be one of the more poetic choices they could make. She arrived without a dragon. She found one she can barely control. And wherever Sheepstealer goes, she goes with him, off into an uncertain future that the audience can imagine for themselves. There's a specific detail about Sheepstealer in Fire and Blood that I've always found quietly charming, given everything else that's going on. He's called Sheepstealer because, well, he stole sheep. He lived wild on Dragonstone for generations, descending on local flocks and carrying them off, and the small folk and farmers around the island eventually just accepted this as a fact of life. The Targaryens occasionally tried to claim him, but he was aggressively disinterested in being ridden, and so he remained feral. He is the most ordinary of the great dragons in some ways, not Vhagar, the ancient war beast, not Ku-Rax, the ferocious bloodworm, not Sai-Rax, the queen's companion. Just a dragon who lived in the cliffs and ate mutton and wanted nothing to do with human politics. That a wild, disinterested dragon who actively resisted domestication becomes one of the most significant creatures in the last phase of the dance is rather a nice bit of storytelling structure. The things that remain ungoverned tend to become the most important when everything else has been consumed. There's also the question of what Rhaenyra becomes as a person if she's separated from the family drama of Dragonstone and King's Landing and left to navigate the world on a feral dragon by herself. The show has treated her as a character who's always been slightly in Baela's shadow. Baela is the more confident, more directly involved of the two sisters. Rhaenyra has been thoughtful and patient, where Baela is decisive and immediate. Being alone, responsible for herself, and for a dragon who keeps doing unexpected things, might be exactly the context in which Rhaenyra comes into her own. The Isle of Faces connection is interesting here too. The green man who appeared in episode 1 near the dragon seeds, in the Vale region where Rhaenyra was operating, that's not a random encounter. The Isle of Faces and its guardians are clearly going to have some role in the remaining story. If the old magic of Westeros is paying attention to who rides which dragons and what choices they make, Rhaenyra on Sheepstealer is exactly the kind of unconventional arrangement that might attract that attention. Let's step back from the individual theories for a moment and talk about what the show is doing as an adaptation, because I think there are some genuinely interesting structural choices being made that are worth dwelling on. Fire and Blood is written as a fictional history. Specifically, it's presented as a scholarly work compiled by a character called Archmeister Gildane from various accounts, interviews, chronicles, and memoirs, which means the text is explicitly unreliable. Events are reported in multiple contradictory versions. Motivations are speculated about. The true inner lives of the historical figures are essentially inaccessible. Martin is doing something clever with the form. A history told by historians will always be partial, always filtered, always shaped by who gets to write things down. House of the Dragon gets to do something the book fundamentally can't. It shows us what actually happened. Or rather, it proposes one authoritative version of events. When Alicent and Rhaenyra meet in that sept in Season 2, or when Daemon sees his vision at Harrenhal, those are scenes that couldn't exist in Fire and Blood because no chronicler was present. The show is filling in the humanity behind the historical record. The big changes the show has made are worth cataloguing. First, the Rhaenyra-Alicent friendship. The book mentions that they knew each other as children, but the show built a whole emotional architecture around their bond, their shared girlhood, their complicated love for each other, the specific grief of watching that love become something adversarial. That friendship is what gives the war its personal tragedy. Without it, the dance is a succession dispute. With it, it's a story about how badly things can go when people who once genuinely cared for each other end up on opposing sides of something that can't be resolved by caring. Second, Daemon's visions at Harrenhal. In the book, Daemon just kind of goes quiet for a while and is presumably doing something useful there. The show turned his absence into an extended psychological and mystical crisis, and crucially, into the clearest explicit link between the show and Game of Thrones. Daemon sees the White Walkers, he sees Daenerys' hatching dragons, he sees the future of House Targaryen. This is entirely new, and it's making an argument that the dance of the dragons matters, because it's the story that leads 200 years later to the events of the original series. Third, Alicent as the architect of King's Landing's fall. In the book, it's Daemon who outmaneuvers Awaymond and lures him out to Harrenhal. In the show, Alicent is the one who gets Aemond to leave. She sends him, using her son's emotional dependency on her, using her forged letter to Ormond's army, using every tool she has. This is a significant change because it makes Alicent an active agent in the Black Victory, rather than simply a bystander to it. The show's Alicent is, by the end of Season 2, doing what she's always been best at, working within constraints to achieve an outcome, just this time in Rhaenyra's favour. Fourth, Rhaenyra instead of Nettles. We've already covered this one in some detail. The broader point it makes about the adaptation is that the show is willing to remove characters entirely if it can find a better narrative home for their role within the existing cast. Nettles' story is compelling in the book, partly because she's an outsider, entirely self-made, with no connection to the Targaryen world beyond her dragon. Rhaenyra's version of the story is more emotionally entwined with the existing characters, which makes it less surprising but arguably more resonant for a television audience that has spent 3 seasons with these people. George R.R. Martin has been publicly unhappy with various aspects of the adaptation, which is not exactly new. He's been publicly unhappy with aspects of every adaptation of his work. The specific grievances he's raised include some of the tonal choices and the speed with which certain relationships and motivations have been handled. He and Ryan Condal are not always aligned on what the show should be. The fact that Season 3 appears to be drawing stronger critical reviews than Season 2, 91% on Rotten Tomatoes, from initial critics, according to early ratings, suggests Condal has found his footing, even if Martin remains conflicted. What I find most interesting about all the divergences is what they collectively say about the show's central argument. House of the Dragon seems to be making the case that the Dance of the Dragons was a tragedy born of misunderstanding as much as malice, that if Alicent had understood Viceroy Essed properly, none of it needed to happen. The book doesn't quite have that through line because it's told at too much remove. The show has built its whole emotional structure on that specific cause, that specific mistake, and the consequences rippling outward from it across 3 seasons. It gives the story a coherence that the book, for all its richness, doesn't quite have. There's one other adaptation choice I want to flag, because I think it's going to matter as we head deeper into Season 3. The show has been building a version of Rhaenyra that is more emotionally centred, more visibly principled, and more genuinely likeable than the book's Rhaenyra in many respects. Emma Darcy has made her into someone you actively root for, which is not always the case in Fire and Blood. And this creates a specific narrative challenge for the show when it has to portray Rhaenyra making bad decisions. How do you show a character you've built sympathetically making choices that are unjust, like falsely accusing Adam, or becoming increasingly paranoid, or making political decisions driven by grief without it feeling like a betrayal of everything the show has built? The answer, presumably, is that you dramatise the fear underneath the decision. You show us what it feels like to be Rhaenyra in those moments. The grief over Jace, the anxiety about A.Y. Mond still being out there, the distrust of people she has every pragmatic reason to trust, the exhaustion of ruling while mourning. You make the wrong decision, understandable, without making it right. This is much harder than simply writing a villain as villainous or a hero as heroic. It requires the kind of sustained attention to psychological truth that good television drama is capable of at its best, and that House of the Dragon has sometimes achieved magnificently. Rhaenyra's turn in King's Landing, if the show handles it well, is its biggest test. The other thing worth noting is what the show is doing with time. Fire and Blood covers events spanning years within a compressed time frame. The show has been deliberately paced, dwelling in specific moments, rather than skipping across the surface. But the dance is accelerating now. The Gullet, King's Landing, Tumbleton, the Storming. If all of these happen within Season 3's 8 episodes, the show's going to have to pick up its own pace considerably. Whether it manages to maintain the emotional specificity